particularly in the health and social care sectors. So can the Prime Minister tell me, or perhaps he and his Chancellor would like to come to my constituency and explain to those GPs, to charities and others how they are meant to cope without extra support from the government?
Mr. Speaker, what I would say is this: because of the tough decisions that we took, we have put forward a budget with an extra, Mr. Speaker, an extra £25.6 billion for the NHS and for social care. That includes an increase to carers allowance and £600 million available to deal with the pressures of adult social care. We will ensure that GP practices have the resources that we need, and the funding arrangements between the NHS and contractors will be set out in the usual way.
Lord Hutton.
Mr. Speaker, members have raised their concerns with a range of damaging policies pursued by the Leader of the Opposition. This includes voting against critical investment for our NHS, stating that maternity pay is excessive and the minimum wage a burden, and even backing harmful fracking when last in government. So is the Prime Minister aware of any attempt by the Leader of the Opposition to justify these dangerous positions which would cause untold damage to communities like mine in South Dorset?
This government has given millions of people a pay rise of £1,400 by boosting them in minimum wage. We've strengthened parental leave with better rights for parents, got huge investment into our schools and NHS, and all of that whilst ensuring that pay slips of working people have not been affected. It's clear whose side we're on, the working people of this country. Now, I haven't heard the Leader of the Opposition clarify why she opposes all these things, but now is her chance.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bernal.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can plant as many questions as is like with his backbenchers, but at the end of the day, I'm the one he has to face at the dispatch box. And I welcome him, Mr. Speaker. I welcome him back from... Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister back from his trip to Azerbaijan, where he has unilaterally made commitments that will make life more experienced for everyone back home. Speaking of making life...
Somebody's suggesting reading. I think if you notice, the Prime Minister also reads. So please get your Leader of the Opposition.
And, Mr. Speaker, I can pre-prepare my questions, but he needs to answer from his mind. Yes. Speaking of making life...
Responsible for the answers.
So he has made life more expensive with his unilateral commitments, but speaking of making life more expensive, will the Prime Minister confirm that he will keep the cap on council tax?
Mr. Speaker, she talks of the trip to COP. I'm very proud of the fact that we're restoring leadership on climate to this country, to the UK, because that will be measured in lower bills on energy independence and the jobs of the future. And in relation, and she may have missed, but on Monday I was very pleased to announce a huge order into jobs in Hull for blades for offshore wind. If she's opposed to that sort of action, she should go to Hull and say so. On the question of council, she knows what the arrangements are.
I think the House would have heard that the Prime Minister could neither confirm nor deny whether there was a cap in council tax was being raised. So I will ask him this question. How much extra does he expect local authorities will have to raise to cover the social care funding gap created by the Chancellor's budget and increases in employers' NI? He told the member for Edinburgh West just now that he was covering social care. How much extra does he expect local authorities to raise?
It's all very well, this knockabout, but not actually listening to what I said 3 minutes ago. It's a bit of a fundamental failure of the Leader of the Opposition. I just said £600 million. I repeat it, £600 million.
Kemi Bernal.
that he has repeated that number because he has probably not listened to the Labour-run LGA, who said that with no separate funding for the Chancellor's budget announcements, care providers will likely see increased costs, which will cost councils more, and all of the £600 in grant increase he is giving will not cover what is required for adult social care. It is clear that they had not thought through the impact of the budget, and this is the problem with having a copy-and-paste Chancellor. Did they not realise that care homes, GP surgeries, children's nurseries, hospices, and even charities have to pay employers' NI?
We have put more money into local authorities than they did in 14 years. They left in an absolutely catastrophic state. We produced a budget which does not increase tax on working people, nothing in the payslip, investing in our NHS, investing in our schools so every child can go as far as their talent will take them, investing in the houses of the future. If she's against those things, she should say so.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not against any of those things. But, of course not. None of us are against any of those things. But he has confirmed that he does not know what is going on. The Prime Minister probably does not realise that on Monday, the Ministry for Communities, Local Government and Housing revealed that councils will need to find an additional £2.4 billion in council tax next year. That's a lot more than £600 million. I know that he's been away, but did the Deputy Prime Minister, who runs that department, make him aware of their £2.4 billion black hole?
So let me get this straight, Mr. Speaker. She doesn't want any of the measures in the budget, but she wants all the benefits. So the magic money tree is back after 2 weeks in office. 2 weeks in office. They've learned absolutely nothing. We've put forward a budget which takes the difficult decisions, fixing the £22 billion black hole that they left, investing in the future of our country. They say they want all of that, but they don't know how they're going to pay for it. Same old Tories.
Mr. Speaker, even he has to admit that they fiddled the fiscal rules. The OBR has actually said that they don't recognise where the additional growth is going to come from. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the rise in employers' national insurance is going to be a disaster for small businesses around the country. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you about Kelly. For over 20 years, Kelly has run an after-school club business supporting 500 children and families in her borough. In 2024, her national insurance cost was about £10,000. In April, this will rise to £26,000. That is a 150% increase in costs from the budget alone. What is the Prime Minister's message to Kelly and the 500 families her small business supports if it goes under?
I would say this to Kelly. We inherited a very badly damaged economy. We inherited a £22 billion black hole, and we were not prepared to continue with the fiction. We stabilised...
Oh, Ms Lopez, I'm sure I couldn't expect better from you as a PPS as well, Prime Minister.
I would say to Kelly, we are fixing the mess that we were left. We're investing in the future of our country. I would also say to her that the Leader of the Opposition, week 2, wants all the benefits from the budget, but has no way of saying how she's going to pay for it. Same old mistake over and over again.
Mr. Speaker, he has nothing to offer except platitudes. And the fact is that they do not know what they're doing. Their ideological budget was designed to milk the private sector and hope nobody would notice. Now his cabinet ministers are all queuing up for public sector bailouts to his tax mess. If he is going to bail out the public sector, then can he tell us this? Does he think it is appropriate, as the Ministry for Housing has done, to approve a 4-day week for councils that is not flexible working, but is actually part-time work for full-time pay?
Questions based on what we're actually doing are usually better than fantasy questions made up. Mr. Speaker, what did they deliver in 14 years? Low growth, stagnant economy, a disastrous mini-budget, a £22 billion PACO, and now she wants to give me advice on running the economy. I don't want to be rude, but no, thank you very much.
Patrick, yes, you, right at the end, Patrick. So,
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Towns like mine in Southport need investment and support after 14 years of decline from the party opposition. So can the Prime Minister confirm that his budget will provide that much-needed investment for towns like mine, and further confirm that, unlike the previous government, my local authority and the public services that my town relies on will be finally properly supported?
Can I begin by paying tribute to my honourable friend and to his constituents in Southport. They've shown extraordinary courage and resilience as they try to rebuild from the devastating tragedy and loss earlier this year. We will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Southport are supported now and in the years to come. The budget is designed to fix the crucial services that his constituents rely on, including £1.3 billion of new funding for local government, an investment in safer streets, in our NHS for the future, and that's the direction in which we're taking the country.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to fixing the crisis in the NHS that he's inherited, the Prime Minister has rightly recognised the need to improve access to GPs. But like my honourable friend, the member for Edinburgh West, GPs in my constituency are writing to me to tell me how worried they are about the impact of the national insurance hike on patient care. So I listened very carefully to what he said to my honourable friend, but I have to say I hope he can think again. Will he at least exempt GPs, community pharmacists and other health and care providers from this tax rise?
I hear the point he makes and I understand the concern. We have made a huge investment in our NHS, the biggest ever investment in our NHS for many, many years, and certainly almost all the people working in the NHS are very, very pleased to see that investment in them and in their service. On the question of GPs, we will ensure they've got the resources that we need, and the funding arrangements will be set out in the usual way later this year.
Sir Ed Davey.
Speaker, I have to say I think patients and GPs and others listening to answer will want more reassurance and much more quickly. But if I may turn to the war in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, a senior advisor to President-elect Trump, Donald Trump Jr., has shared a post on Instagram that declares that President Zelensky will soon, within the next few weeks, lose his allowance. If the Trump administration does withdraw support from our brave Ukrainian allies, will the UK and Europe step up to fill the gap? Will he seize frozen Russian assets, not just the interest, but the assets underlying that, so we can fund a huge boost to the Ukrainian forces in their fight against Putin's war machine?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, we've been resolute and strong in our support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression, and I have been speaking, as he will know, in recent weeks with other leaders about how we put Ukraine in the best and strongest possible position at this time, and I'll continue those discussions. Thank you.
David Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Child poverty is a national scandal. In St Helens North, it increased by over 50% under the previous government. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to address this, ideally cross-party? And if so, does he share my concern that the Conservatives have opposed actions we're taking with the budget, employment rights, housing and more, not to mention their leaders' comments on maternity pay, which suggest they just don't get what working families and their children need?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Under the party opposite, we saw child poverty increase by 700,000. This was a budget that not only invests in our NHS and our schools, but also ensures that working people won't face a penny extra in their pay slips or at the petrol pump. But because it came to tough decisions on tax, we haven't touched national insurance, income tax or VAT, just as we promised on working people. We also gave 3 million of the lowest paid a pay rise, something which the party opposite seems to be opposing. Thank you.
Come in, Robinson.
Prime Minister, Lebanon is in crisis and my constituent Catherine Flanagan is in despair. Her 3-year-old son, David Nally, has been out of her care for the last 2 years. The Belfast High Court has indicated that he should be returned to his mother, and they have issued a bench warrant for the arrest of his father. But when she fled domestic violence in Beirut, she got no help or assistance from the UK Embassy. And when she has sought assistance from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to be returned with her son, to see her son again, and this British citizen come back to the UK, she has not received the assistance that she or I in our community expect she should. Can I ask the Prime Minister to engage in this issue and at the very least ask the Foreign Secretary to assist my constituent in her earnest desire to see her 3-year-old son again?
Can I thank the Right Honourable Member for raising this case and for all that he's doing on behalf of Catherine and David. I hope they get some comfort from knowing they've got an MP working so hard on their behalf. It is, I know, a complex and difficult situation, but of course I will make sure that the relevant meetings are set up with the relevant ministers to ensure that he gets the answers that he needs on behalf of his constituents.
Colin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Burton and Uttoxeter is the home of UK brewing and has the best pubs in the country. The Prime Minister is welcome to join me for a pint in sampling the very best beer in the world. As this government looks to reform business rates and consult on the changes, will the Prime Minister commit to ensuring that pubs and hospitality have a seat at the table?
Mr. Speaker, last time I went to my honourable friend's constituency, I got to see the fantastic South Derbyshire College. I look forward now to testing his proposition that he has the best pubs in his constituency on some future occasion. But pubs and breweries are such an important part of our culture and of our communities, and that's why the budget delivered an £85 million per year tax cuts for pubs, reducing the duty on a pint. We also delivered a 40% relief on business rates for next year and permanently lowering them for the year after. We're protecting small businesses by more than doubling the employer allowance to £10,500. Thank you.
In the past week, there have been reports of more schools who are slated for closure as a direct consequence of the Prime Minister's ideologically driven policy to introduce VAT on school fees and increase national insurance contributions. This will be a pattern seen up and down the country and will lead to staff being unemployed and pupils and parents being cast adrift. Will the Prime Minister do the decent thing and abandon this policy and apologise to those affected?
I do understand the concerns of those that save to send their children to private school because they believe in aspiration and opportunity. What I would say is that every single parent shares that aspiration and opportunity, whichever school they send them to. Under the last government, we didn't have enough teachers in basic subjects in our state secondary schools. They were prepared to tolerate that. I'm not.
Mr. Speaker, 3 million people across the country, including an estimated 70,000 in Wales, will benefit from Labour's budget measures on the minimum wage and the national living wage. Contrast that with the Leader of the Opposition, who said minimum wage was hurting businesses, or the Shadow Chancellor, who called minimum wage a burden. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that those comments underline that the Tories have no interest in protecting working people or boosting the income of the lowest paid?
Mr. Speaker, it was the last Labour government that introduced the national minimum wage. In the teeth of opposition from the party opposite, I'm proud that this government has now increased it by over 16%. That means an increase of over £2,500 a year for a full-time worker who are aged 18 to 20. Whether it's our employment rights bills or decisions at the budget, this is a government that is proudly on the side of Britain's working people.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that Sue Gray has remarkably turned down the opportunity to be the Prime Minister's special envoy to the nations, will the Prime Minister now finally admit that it was an invented job on taxpayers' money from one of his cronies? And if it wasn't, is he going to hire a new one?
It wasn't.
Antonia Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I represent loads of hard-working mums and dads in Tipton, Wednesbury and Coseley. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition's campaign chair, Rachel McLean, said it was not the right decision for the Tories to expand childcare provision. Will the Prime Minister confirm that this Labour government believes in supporting working families and will work to get them the childcare they need?
Let me be absolutely clear. This government is committed to making childcare more affordable and accessible. The party opposite voted against making life easier for working families. They've learned absolutely nothing. We're committed to £1.8 billion to expand access across childcare, creating 3,000 new school-based nurseries and family hubs. And I'm proud that we're taking the country in the right direction.
Mr. Speaker, Article 2 of the United Nations Genocide Convention makes it explicitly clear that genocide is not about numbers, it's about intent. And the intent of the Israeli government and the IDF has been explicitly clear in words and in actions over the past 400 days. More than 45,000 innocent men, women and children killed. On the 28th of October, the Foreign Secretary denied that a genocide was even taking place and suggested that the Israeli army had not yet killed enough Palestinians to constitute a genocide. And last week, the PMQs, the Prime Minister started that he has never referred to the atrocities happening in Gaza as a genocide. Will the Prime Minister share his definition of genocide with this House, and will he state what further action he is prepared to take to save lives of desperate and starving men, women and children, given that we now hold the presidency of the United Nations Security Council?
It would be wise to start a question like that by reference to what happened in October of last year. I'm well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why I've never described this and referred to it as genocide.
Katie White.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent's daughter, Bethany Ray Fields, was brutally murdered by her ex-boyfriend in 2019, despite raising multiple alarms of this abuse to the police. Bethany's mother, Pauline, travelled down to Parliament this week to bring her case to the Minister. Does the Prime Minister agree with Pauline that more needs to be done to shift the culture towards believing and reacting fast to victims when they sound the alarm of concern as one way to reduce violence against women and girls?
What happened to Bethany is appalling. My thoughts, as I'm sure the whole House, is with her families. We do need a culture shift here, and we have committed to halving violence against women and girls in a decade. No government has ever made that commitment before. I hope that can be something which is shared across the House, because this is so important, and it starts with that central question of belief and confidence. For every woman or young woman who comes forward, there are probably about 9 who never have the confidence to come forward, and that starts with belief and the culture that we put in place, and we're committed to that. And I invite the whole House to join us on that mission to halve violence against women and girls.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister and the whole House would wish to congratulate Donald Trump on his landslide victory last week.
Hold on. I will hear the question. Nigel.
Thank you. But within a couple of days, we'd learned of a third assassination attempt. Charges have been laid, and behind it are Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Has the time not come, Prime Minister, to prescribe what is so obviously a terrorist organisation, and in doing so, not just do the right thing, but maybe mend some fences between this government and the incoming presidency of Donald Trump's, given that the whole of his cabinet have been so rude about him over the last few years?
Well, I'm glad to see the honourable member making a rare appearance back here in Britain. He spent so much time in America recently. I was half expecting to see him on the immigration statistics when we see the next batch. But he may have missed. I did congratulate the incoming president last week. And we will work with him. The point he makes about Iran is a very serious point, and we will work across the House and with our allies on it. Obviously, on question of prescription, we keep them under review. Thank you.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's recognition of Islamophobia Awareness Month and his commitment to supporting Muslim communities. The APPG on British Muslims' definition of Islamophobia is one of the most widely accepted definitions on this issue, and I have been discussing the adoption of it with the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Faith, and the Leader of the House. Given recent riots and doubling of Islamophobic hate crimes over the last decade, can the Prime Minister outline the steps this government will take to tackle this issue and commit to ensuring a clear and effective definition of Islamophobia?
Well, I thank him for raising this important issue. Whatever the hatred, there has been a rise in the last 12 months or so, and I think the whole House will join in saying we must meet any rise in hatred in whatever form it is, including Islamophobia. We are working with others to take this forward, and I'm happy to meet with him further on that.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was in South Lochaber at the weekend speaking to pensioners who still cannot understand why the Prime Minister chose to take away their winter fuel payment. And one of them remembered from just 2 years ago the then Leader of the Opposition saying, "Looking ahead to winter is frightening. I've met pensioners who have no idea how they'll heat their home." And she asked me to ask you, Prime Minister, whatever happened to that guy?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows from previous answers, we've taken tough decisions in this budget to deal with the situation that we've faced. Because of that, we've stabilised the economy, which means we can commit to the triple lock. Because of the triple lock, pensioners will be better off. But I'll take no lectures from his party about running the economy. Their record in Scotland is terrible.
Juliet Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the establishment of a flood resilience task force because in my constituency of Broxtowe there has been unprecedented flooding that has affected many of my constituents. There's rising concern and significant financial insecurity for many who face distress, trauma and fear in their own homes. May I ask the Prime Minister what other measures he's taking to improve flood resilience and support that will be available to my residents and my constituents in Broxtowe?
I do know the dreadful impact that flooding has had on her constituency, including with Storm Henk earlier this year. The last government left flood defences in the worst condition on record. We are investing £2.4 billion in flood resilience over the next 2 years, and we've launched a flood resilience task force to coordinate national and local flood preparation to better protect communities and our economy. Rather than heckling, they might take a reflection on the record that they left.
James McMurdo.
Mr. Speaker, the residents of my constituency in South Basildon and East Thurrock are facing a triple whammy of increased council tax of 50%, reduced public services and a borrowing on £1 billion worth of emergency funding, which is 1% above base. That 1% is £10 million approximately per year that's going to the Treasury that could be spent on frontline services in Thurrock. Will the Prime Minister commit to reducing that rate so the money can go where it belongs?
Well, I thank him for his question. The last government made life even more difficult for councils needing exceptional financial support by charging a premium on borrowing. That was the wrong decision, which had a huge impact on vital services, and we will be taking a different approach. We're delivering in real terms increase on core public, on government spending power, and that will benefit his constituents.
Sir John Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition took time at her party's conference to say that a little bit of adversity in life is good for people's mental health. That approach clearly did not work for the 2 million people who are stuck on mental health waiting lists because of the last Tory government. Can the Prime Minister commit to tackling mental health waits in the NHS?
I think we've obviously recognised the devastating impact that mental health problems have on people's livelihoods, and Lord Darcy's report showed that waiting lists are far too long, and there's a shocking decline in mental health in children under the last government. Giving mental health the attention it needs, we're doing by recruiting 8,500 mental health workers, much needed, and of course reforming the Mental Health Act, which in my view is long overdue.
Alex Blower.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chalk stream rivers are rare with a unique ecology. Most of them are in the UK and 2 are in my constituency of North East Hampshire. Last year, chalk stream rivers were hit with 14,000 hours of sewage discharges, and the previous government did nothing despite calls from my honourable friend, the MP for Chesham and Amersham. Will the Prime Minister introduce a special protection for our chalk stream rivers?
Well, I thank her for raising this, and we are committed to protection and restoration of unique chalk streams. She's right, the destruction of our waterways should never have been allowed, and we've announced immediate action to end this disgraceful behaviour. New powers with tougher penalties, including fines, banning bonuses and bringing criminal charges against those who persistently break the law. We've also launched a water commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's leadership on an international scale to smash the criminal gangs that smuggle people across the border. This Labour government having returned over 9,000 people with no right to be in the UK, which is 20% more than the party opposite. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he will continue this trend and smash the gangs that profit from people's misery?
Yes, the last government lost control of our borders. And in the first 6 months of this year, small bite arrivals were up 18% on the same period last year. They spent £700 million on returning, 4 volunteers to Rwanda. Since coming into office, we've returned 9,400 people with no right to be here. They talked about getting the flights off. We've got the flights off, including the single biggest deportation flight. And so that's why we're investing another £75 million in smashing the gangs. We're absolutely determined to have a serious response to a serious question, not a gimmick that achieved absolutely nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ensuring every child has access to a great education, I'm sure, is a priority for all across this House, and I welcome the announcements for extra funding for children with SEND at the budget. The Chancellor, in her speech, announced a £2.3 billion increase in core spending and £1 billion for SEN. However, the budget document states that they are, in fact, both from the same pot, announced twice, which is correct.
The Chancellor made this absolutely clear in the budget. Putting that huge investment into special educational needs, it's an issue that is of concern across this House, because I think all members are recognising the appalling record of the last government. It's been raised from his own benches, the appalling state of SEN. So I'm very proud of the money that this government is putting in where the last government failed.
Mr. Speaker, there's not a week that goes by where my office isn't contacted by young people and their families who are being let down by the shocking state of SEND provision locally. Across my constituency, I'm trying to work across party lines to push both Central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Council to do more. And I welcome the fantastic extra news in the budget about additional funding and subsequent announcements about increased support for mainstream settings. But we know we're going to do more, need to do more. So can the Prime Minister assure my constituents that we won't shy away from the whole system reform needed to finally ensure every young person has the support they need to thrive in school?
No, we won't shy away from that challenge, because it's far too important for the children and the families and the communities involved, and therefore we will not only put the necessary money in, but we will look at the reform that is needed alongside the investment, and we will finally fix the problem, another of the problems that we've inherited from the lot opposite.
Final question, Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 29th of November, this House will be asked to consider at second reading one of the most consequential pieces of legislation to this country's make-up. But I am generally approaching this with an open mind, but have many concerns. And what concerns me, Prime Minister, is the short space of time on that day. So could I ask you, Prime Minister, that before we get to the 29th of November, that the government will make a commitment that we can have 2 days, 16 hours of protected time on the floor of the House in government time, that we can examine and debate in this House the report stage, so that many of the arguments we are concerned about may be able to be brought out then, because otherwise, Prime Minister, people like myself may decline a second reading over fear that we may not get to be able to debate these issues in full.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this issue. It is obviously an important issue, an important vote, and I know that there are strongly held views on both sides of the debate across this House, and that's why it will be a free vote. I think every member needs to decide for themselves how they will vote on it. It's a free vote. I do think there's sufficient time allocated to it, but it is an important issue.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. Let the front bench. No punch forward to come after your accused statements, which you well know. Mr. Holder. Right, let us come to the urgent question. Nigel Farage.
To ask the Secretary for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs what the latest update is on the transfer of sovereignty of the Chagos Islands from the United Kingdom to Mauritius.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Following 2 years of negotiation under 3 Prime Ministers, on the 3rd of October, this government secured a deal that will protect the secure operation of the UK-US base on Diego Garcia well into the next century. This government inherited a situation where this future was under threat. International courts were reaching judgments on the basis that Mauritius had sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago. International organisations were also taking steps, Mr. Speaker, not to undermine Mauritian sovereignty claims. This was not sustainable. The base, Mr. Speaker, on Diego Garcia plays a critical role in countering an array of threats to regional and international security. Without legal certainty, Mr. Speaker, the base simply cannot operate effectively. Continued uncertainty would be a gift to our adversaries. This is why the agreement has been welcomed by all parts of the US system and by other critical regional security partners, including India. Agreeing this deal now on our terms, Mr. Speaker, means we've been able to secure strong protections that will allow the base to operate as it has done. We've secured a deal that protects our national interests, respects the interests of our partners and upholds the international rule of law. There will be clear commitments, Mr Speaker, in the treaty for robust security arrangements, including preventing the presence of foreign security forces on the outer islands, ensuring that the base can continue to operate securely and effectively. We would not, Mr Speaker, have signed off an agreement that compromised any of our security interests or those of our allies. And this agreement will be underpinned by a financial settlement that is acceptable to both sides and will underpin a strong long-term partnership with Mauritius. This was crucial to securing the agreement, Mr Speaker. This government will not scrimp on our national security. However, I am sure the House will understand, Mr Speaker, that it is not normal practice for the UK to reveal the value of payments for military bases anywhere across the globe, because to do that would put them at risk of their future secure operations. The deal, Mr Speaker, will also deliver benefits for the Chagosian community who were removed from the islands in the 1960s and 1970s. And I know that the whole House have already and will again join with me in expressing regret for that shameful episode. Mauritius will now be able to implement a programme of resettlement to the islands other than Diego Garcia, and we will work together to start a programme of visits for Chagosians to all of the islands. And the UK will finance a new trust fund for Mauritius to support Chagosians and provide additional government support to those living in the UK. All Chagosians will, of course, remain eligible for British citizenship and free to make their homes in the UK. We will work, Mr Speaker, with Mauritius to ensure the continued protection of the island's unique environment, with the shared objective of securing and protecting one of the world's most important marine environments, and this will include the establishment of a Mauritian Marine Protected Area. This agreement, Mr Speaker, also shuts down the possibility of the Indian Ocean being used as a dangerous illegal migration route to the UK, with Mauritius taking responsibility for any future arrivals. Mr Speaker, the long-term protection on the base on Diego Garcia has been the shared UK and US priority throughout. This agreement secures its future. We look forward to engaging with the incoming US administration. I congratulate both President Trump and Dr Ramgoolan on their recent election victories in the US and Mauritius respectively, and we look forward to working with their governments on this. This agreement is in all sides' shared interests and in our national security.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mauritius has no legal or historical claim to the sovereignty of a group of islands that are 1,300 miles away from where it is, nor does, from the International Court, it was purely an advisory opinion. There is no legal reason why we have to do any of this. Now, I warned the Foreign Secretary 6 weeks ago in this chamber that it was an enormous mistake to do this, given that we had a US presidential election coming up on November the 5th. And if you say to me, well, yes, it's okay, the United States are fully in favour, really? I can tell you that the incoming National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, has form on this, right back to when the Right Honourable Member for Braintree was doing his best to give away the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. Indeed, he wrote to Secretary of State Blinken at the time. There is, I can assure you, having been in America last week, knowing also the incoming Defence Secretary very well, there is outright hostility to this deal. Whatever is said about a lease agreement, as we saw with Hong Kong, these agreements can very, very easily be broken. Diego Garcia was described to me by a senior Trump advisor as the most important island on the planet as far as America was concerned. So you're going to find outright hostility. And by the way, when it comes to the Chagosian people, yes, of course, what happened to them was truly awful. They do not wish to live. They're unanimous in this. They do not wish to live under Mauritian rule. They want to live under British rule because they actually trust us. There is no basis for this agreement to continue as it is, and if you do, you'll be at conflict with a country without which we would be defenceless.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm afraid, obviously, I fundamentally disagree with what the honourable gentleman has had to say. Let me be absolutely clear. This government inherited a situation where the long-term secure operation of this crucial military base, he is right on that one point, was under threat. International courts were reaching judgments, international organisations were taking steps not to undermine Mauritian sovereignty, and this threatened the secure and effective operation of the base. And in the absence of a negotiated solution, a legally binding decision against the UK seemed inevitable. This would have threatened the secure and effective operation of the base, and that was not sustainable. I note the comments he makes regarding the incoming US administration. We're looking very forward to working with them, and I'm sure that they will be being briefed on the full detail of this deal. And I am confident, Mr. Speaker, that the details of this arrangement will allay any concerns. We would have not entered into any such arrangement in the first place.
Mr Francois, I welcome you back to the front bench, but I don't welcome you back to shout from it continuously. Do we understand that we need calm? This is an important debate, so I don't want the rhetoric coming from the Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've known the honourable gentleman a long time, and he knows he can come and speak to me at any point. No, absolutely, Mr. Speaker, but he can come and speak to me about these matters at any point. Mr. Speaker, we were very, very clear. The US administration that's incoming, we will be working very closely. We're working closely with the current US administration. This had support across the national security apparatus of the United States. We would never have entered into an arrangement. And indeed, of course, the previous government recognised the threats to the long-term operation of this base, which is why they started the negotiations in the first place. But it was this government that did the deal. Diego Garcia is absolutely important, but it is not at risk. It is more secure as a result of this deal. So what he is suggesting is simply not the case. He mentions the Chagosians. We all agree what happened to them in the past was completely wrong and shameful. That's been agreed on all sides of the House. I've engaged with the Chagosian community on a number of occasions. He will also recognise, Mr. Speaker, that there are a range of views across the Chagosian community, including those who support this deal. But we've made sure that their interests are at the heart of this arrangement, whether it's in the trust fund, whether it's in the unilateral arrangements that we will do, the continued commitments to UK citizenship for Chagosians, and, of course, their ability to return, Mr. Speaker, in terms of visits to all the islands and to a part of a resettlement programme that Mauritius will restart as a part of this treaty. So I am confident this deal is the right thing for our national security, it's the right thing for the Chagosian community, and it's the right thing for our allies and partners.
We heard representations from the Honourable Member for Clacton about upholding international law. Does the Minister agree with me that it is important that the UK fulfils its obligations in international law, and does he recognise, in fact, that in 2021 the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea confirmed that, in fact, Mauritius does have sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, and notwithstanding that this deal does secure the long-term certainty of the base on Diego Garcia?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's absolutely right. Agreeing this deal now on our terms means we've been able to secure protections that will allow the base to operate as it has done into the next century. It settles the historic sovereignty claims in a way that successfully balances our international law obligations with vital UK and US national security requirements.
Welcome, Dame Patel, to the front bench.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the world is a more dangerous place than ever before in our lifetimes, and this government has agreed to give away a key strategic asset in the Indian Ocean, ending more than 200 years of British sovereignty. It is a wrong decision, and we stand by that completely. A month has now gone since the government's announcement, but we're still in the dark about exactly what the government has agreed, and this is simply not acceptable. We have no treaty, and vital questions remain unanswered. That is unacceptable, and the Minister needs to put that right today. We cannot afford for our military base on Diego Garcia to be compromised in this way. So may I ask, what safeguards will be in place to ensure that no other states can establish themselves or place their assets, and in particular strategic assets, on any nearby islands in the archipelago? And how does this decision affect the strategic defence review that is underway right now? How much money will Labour be asking British taxpayers to send to Mauritius each year under this deal, which we don't even know the details of? Which departmental budgets will this come from? What's the total figure? The House expects transparency on this, Mr. Speaker, including about what taxpayers are funding, and we need to hold the government to account on this. So can the Minister please give a cast-iron guarantee that the UK will be able to unilaterally extend the agreement on the military base beyond 99 years, because that's all we've heard for now. What will be the mechanism for doing this? This is a crucial piece of scrutiny that I think we all need to know about, particularly as the Minister has discussed and raised a point about national security, and the national security apparatus in particular agreeing to this arrangement. And what discussions has the Foreign Secretary, who I know is not here today, has personally undertaken with the Chagosian community, who he will know are beyond distraught about this agreement. Yeah. The elections in Mauritius and the United States, Mr. Speaker, pose further questions, and it's right that we follow up on this. Labour rushed into this deal just before the Mauritian elections, even though ministers surely must have realised a change in government was a strong possibility. Why did they do this? So the minister does need to be clear about this. We want to know how they're going to engage with the new US administration. And Mr. Speaker, this side of the House opposes this government's decision on this, and we intend to hold the government to account.
Mr. Speaker, can I firstly welcome the Shadow Foreign Secretary to a place in this chamber. We were in a committee earlier on today, but I welcome her to a place, and as always, I've had a good engagement with her on issues in the past, but she's right to ask important questions. But I think one of the first things I need to do, Mr. Speaker, is to correct this idea somehow that we are giving up the base. That's exactly the opposite of what we're doing. We're securing the future of the base. The base will continue to operate. It will continue to operate as it has done. She asks an important question about security guarantees in relation to the Outer Islands. This is an important question. There will be clear commitments in the treaty for robust security arrangements, including preventing the presence of foreign security forces on the Outer Islands. We simply would not have signed off an agreement that compromised any of our security interests or those of our allies. And indeed, this has been discussed not just at the political level in the United States, but at a deep technical level. And she will know from her time in government about the nature of the special relationship and the depth of that relationship. And that is why we've only proceeded on the basis that we were all satisfied with these arrangements. And she will be able to scrutinise these in due course, as will the House, Mr. Speaker. The treaty will be presented in the usual way after signature. It will go through the usual process. She asks when. We've, of course, just had the Mauritian election. Of course, we'll be engaging with the new administration there. We'll be seeking to present this for signature, and then we will be presenting the treaty in all its detail to the House. She asked about an extension period, Mr. Speaker. There is a provision in the treaty for an extension period after the 99-year period. And she asked about the Chagosians. Again, I would gently say there are a range of views in the Chagosian community. Those have been expressed to me on a range of occasions, both before I came into government and since I've been in government. There are a range of views on this arrangement. We respect all the different views that are out there. We will continue to engage with the Chagosian community, but I am absolutely clear that there are important provisions in this deal that support the Chagosian community, both their ability to return to the Outer Islands, the visits, the trust fund, the unilateral support we will continue to provide, and of course, the fact that Chagosians are welcome to come here to the UK and take up British citizenship, which is an agreement under the previous government.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Portsmouth is the home of the Royal Navy, and as the Portsmouth North MP, can I welcome the appointment of Jonathan Powell as the National Security Advisor, who played an important part in negotiating this deal. Does the Minister agree with me that his experience in helping to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement and work on some of the world's most complex conflicts, he is uniquely placed to advise the government on tackling the challenges ahead and to protect the advancements of UK security?
Well, I totally agree with my honourable friend, who I know takes a keen interest in the overseas territories, in particular Gibraltar. For her comments, I totally agree with her about the new National Security Advisor. He's a remarkable individual with a huge track record in government of making deals, of getting things done, which I know is appreciated by our friends on the opposite side of the Atlantic too. And he is somebody who takes the national security of this country extraordinarily seriously. And therefore, I completely agree with her characterisation.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Al Pinkerton.
Mr. Speaker, many Chagosians from all over the country gathered at a rally yesterday where they expressed their concerns about the UK-Mauritius agreement, and we reiterate our concerns here today. The exclusion of the voice of Chagosians is wrong. It cannot be right, and surely no member of this House could think it is acceptable that the Chagosians are denied the opportunity for self-determination. So can I ask the Minister to update the House to confirm, please, the timescales by which Parliament will have an oversight over the final treaty? Will the Minister also look again at injecting the voice of Chagosians into this process, even at this late stage, please? And can we also raise, please, the case of the Tamils stranded on Diego Garcia? We welcome recent news reports that they will now be airlifted to the UK, but will the Minister update the House on whether this will take place? and whether they will be permitted permanent right to resettlement in the UK. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman speaking for the Liberal Democrats for his questions. I know the future of the islands is hugely important to the Chagosian community. I've engaged with the Chagosian community over many, many years, and since I've been in government too. And we have always been clear, Mr. Speaker, on the importance of respecting their interests. I do have to say, though, that the negotiations were between the UK and Mauritius as the sovereign states, with our priority being to secure the full operation of the base on Diego Garcia. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is crucial that we recognise the importance of Chagosian interests within this process, and we have done. And I am confident that when the full deal is presented to Parliament, which it will do in due course, that there will be important provisions in there that I think will reassure members of the Chagosian community. And as I mentioned, some of them already have been made public.